Welcome to the Relationship Recovery Podcast, hosted by Jessica Knight, a certified life coach who specializes in narcissistic and emotional abuse. This podcast is intended to help you identify manipulative and abusive behavior, set boundaries with yourself and others, and heal the relationship with yourself so you can learn to love in a healthy way.
Hello, and thanks for being here. Today, we have Nat, who you may have seen on Instagram and TikTok as Mending Me. She runs a page where her description says sex is for women too, and she talks about sexual coercion and marital coercion and normalizes really tough things a lot of women are likely dealing with in relationships. This is not a topic that is just for a narcissistic relationship. This is a topic that can happen in all relationships. It's not just about an abuser. It's not just about the narcissist. This can happen in every single relationship. So as you listen to this, if you feel like this is it, this is what I'm dealing with, really listen. And then go to her website, which will be posted in the show notes, and learn more. She has a wealth of knowledge. At the end of the podcast, we touch a little bit on sex and Christianity and how that can lead to sexual and marital coercion. And I highly, highly recommend you check out her TikTok and her Instagram because she is constantly posting really helpful information. And I'm so grateful that you joined me for this podcast. Okay, today I have Natalie. Thank you for being here with me today.
Oh, hi.
Natalie, can you introduce yourself and tell us what you do and who you are and touch on your platform too?
Okay. My name is Nat, and I started TikTok 2 years ago, just about when my ex and I first separated, and my head was a mess and I didn't know what to do. And I just wanted to talk about it to somebody anonymously. So I set up a new TikTok account without anything but my name, Nat. Yeah. And I started to talk about just what was happening in my home at that time. And I met a lot of women. I expected maybe a dozen people or so would find it. I didn't understand how the For You page works.
Yeah.
Now I do. Within a couple of weeks, I had a video get over 500,000 views and 20,000 or so comments. And it was insane. And I was overwhelmed and I almost deleted it. But I kept going. And through that process, over the next year, I learned about sexual coercion. I learned about sex for Christians and marriage within Christianity and what that looks like, because that's what I was experiencing. And I started to deconstruct sexuality in general. And I ended up accidentally building a platform on sexual coercion in marriage, which I called Marital Coercion at the time. And so now that was the thing everybody wanted to hear about. And that was the thing I talked about. And now that's everything I talk about.
Yeah.
And so it's been 2 years now. And I have an Instagram as well and a website. And I've written an ebook that is the guy's playbook. This is all the things they say and do as a form of coercion. And that's been really helpful for a lot of people too.
Amazing. Thank you. Do you remember what the first video was about? I'm sure you do. Like
yeah.
The one that got
I have it posted on my website. Day one. It was 6 days after my husband moved out. He went to live with his sister for a while. And I was sitting on the floor of my bedroom because I was so afraid my kids would hear me. So I was between the bed and the wall, just very quietly saying, my husband just moved out and I'm not sure what to do about it, but I just want to talk about some things and get some things off my chest. And maybe this will be a little video diary for me and anyone else who needs to hear it, maybe. And that was it. And then slowly just started to talk about what I thought at the time was just a matter of boundaries, that he just needed to learn how to respect boundaries and then we'd all be okay.
Yeah.
It was very naive.
Yeah, just boundaries. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm sure he'll understand as soon as he he learns, he'll understand, right?
Oh man. If it was just boundaries, we would all not be here right now.
Right.
I think it might be important before we kind of like go forward just to define sexual coercion or how you define it.
Okay. How I define it and how generally it's defined in a Google search it's any words or behavior that causes a person to feel obligated to have sex with somebody. And it can happen leading up to sex, like you said no, and this person is begging now and pressuring you and saying, but come on. Or it can happen after the fact. And this is what we see so often in marriage is somebody will be angry after you've said no. Or it's even the next day or the next week, they're giving you the silent treatment or they're slamming a door and another period. God, didn't you just have one? So that it's constant stream throughout your life that sex is a big deal. And if you're not doing it, you're in trouble. So there's just a lot of behaviors and phrasing of things that are said that cause that. And what I've discovered is that it can actually come from external sources and not just the husband. Sometimes not even the husband.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's friends and family or society or media or books that we're reading or podcasts that we're listening to that are sending this message to women that sex is obligatory.
Yeah. That's so interesting. I didn't actually realize that sexual coercion, that's what that covered. And so would you say that that's different than sexual abuse, or is that like a part of sexual abuse? Yeah. So it's like under the umbrella of sexual abuse, sexual coercion would be underneath.
Now, according to the hotline.org, they describe the very specific things like saying that the relationship is at stake. Like, if you love me, you do it. If you don't, I'll cheat. Those kinds of things. But I take it farther to say that there's even just passive aggressive behavior and there's a whole mood centered around sex. So it's not just, you can't just point to one or two things they're saying or doing. It's a whole overall coercive control in general. When you look into that, it's the same thing. It's just that it's centered specifically around sex.
Yeah.
So outside of marriage, it's usually just you're on a date, things went pretty well, but it really better. Maybe it didn't go so well for you and you're wanting to go home, but he really wants to have sex and you're just trying to get out of that, but he's trying to pressure you, but you don't have to see him again after that. Whatever happens, you don't have to see him again. So the difference within a long-term relationship or marriage is that whether you have sex or not, one way or the other, you're probably going to be waking up with them the next morning. You're probably sharing a home with them. You're sharing a life with them. You maybe have kids with them. And that enters into an entirely different dynamic.
Yeah. A lot of clients that I work with mention that the discomfort of touching, like that their bodies belong to this other person. Not that they believe that, but that their toxic partner believes that. And I work primarily with women. I would say it's about 90% women. And it's always, for me, I always see that as like, no, that's your body. They don't get to put their hand on their thigh just because they feel like it. But a lot of women don't really feel that way.
Yeah. I think we're all conditioned to believe that once you get into a long-term committed relationship, that's just how it is. He's going to put his hand on your thigh and you're rude to do anything about that. You're rejecting him. That's the huge narrative, that we're rejecting him if we don't want that touch. And so it's not about whether or not you want that touch. That doesn't even matter. I don't care whether or not you want that touch. You can't reject your spouse. That's the offense. And that's what I try to get away from. I've done what I don't really understand the nervous system too well, but I know enough about it to know that this deeply affects our nervous system in the body. And so every single touch that we withstand that we don't want is sending a signal of danger to our nervous system. And that's why that touch gets turned off and we don't want it. And so every little touch, even for me, my husband coming up and putting his hand on my back would send me into a tailspin and I'd flinch and want to get away from him. Feel like my skin's crawling because my nervous system has registered a threat, even while my conscious mind is saying, but he's my husband. Why am I feeling this way?
Right. But it's like, it's also, I think it feels like so violating. That's kind of what comes up. So violating.
It's an assault.
Yeah. And it happens so often after the marriage has ended. Like even when they're like getting divorced or separated, I have clients that are like, he called me and asked me to come over and like help me with this knot in my back. And I was like, is he crazy?
Well, I've seen, there was a guy in my comments one day who said that he deliberately goes out of his way to make up reasons to help out with the kids so that he can have access to her and he'll convince her to have sex with him.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah. There's so much that happens. And I don't think a lot of this is normalized, which is really why, well, not normalized, talked about is what I meant. But I think this happens across the board in a lot of these situations. And that's like why I wanted to have you here today, because I know that when I was going through this, I was in a toxic marriage. I knew I didn't want to be in it anymore. And we weren't having sex. And it was because I was so closed off. But I was also like a shell of a human being at the time.
Yeah.
Like I was so depressed and having panic attacks and like I was caretaking the kid 100 hours a day. I was just like, I don't even know who I am. I remember saying like, I need you to give me space and let me breathe. And he wouldn't. And I didn't find him attractive anymore. He'd be like, you don't find me attractive. And I was like, yeah, yes,
They act as though there's something actually wrong with you for feeling
Yeah.
that way. It's
And
nothing
I've actually
he's done.
But I definitely did think there was something wrong with me.
Well, yeah, we
And
do.
yeah. And so I have a lot of clients that come to me that basically have that same exact story and they think that they're crazy. And so I'm sure you hear that every day in some capacity. What is actually going on for the me in the situation? The woman who's not wanting it, who's turned off, who's overwhelmed, who's trying to figure out what to do.
Yeah. I think the most important thing here is to recognize that that reaction is totally normal.
Yeah.
That is exactly how we're supposed to react to somebody who is threatening us physically and sexually and psychologically. That's normal. And I think that is such an important message for these women to understand that they're normal in feeling that, first of all. And then we have to just get rid of the idea that there's something wrong with you, that there's nothing wrong with you. You are reacting exactly how you're supposed to. And the problem is whatever's causing you to react that way. You have to find that threat, whatever that is. If it's not your spouse, maybe it's something else, but figure out what that is. But there is some external threat that's causing your body to react in a certain way, even when your conscious mind isn't aware of why that's happening and you're feeling guilt and shame about that. Something is happening, and it's about getting in tune with your body and listening to your body and figuring out what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess then like that's where that boundary, that we laughed about earlier comes in because with yourself, I think though, it's like to not let yourself get into that cycle of there's something wrong with me instead of like stopping the cycle and saying,
yeah.
Yeah.
And my focus is on what's happening in our own minds. So a lot of women want to go after their husband, like he's raped me, like coercion is rape. We all understand that. But there are women who want to just attack and go after him and I want him arrested or I want this to happen. And I'm like, wait, first you just have to recognize what's happening in your own mind and body. That is the most important part. I also have men who will come along and say, but that's not rape. You can't arrest people for that. That's just coercion, no big deal. But this isn't about arresting anybody. This isn't about holding these men accountable even at all. This is just about getting these women free in their minds so that they know that what's ever happened to them is not their fault and that it's normal for them to be reacting the way that they are is the result of coercion. When you give in to sex that you don't want, that is a sexual assault. Your body is experiencing a sexual assault. So that is really, really important for these women to understand that before you ever try to do anything about it. Just get that right in your head and everything else can flow naturally out of that and healing can begin.
Yeah. I love how you frame that. That's when people come to me and say, how do I leave an abusive relationship? I always say the first step is getting right with the reality in your head, like really accepting what's going on and like getting in touch with it, educating yourself a bit, like really getting clear because everyone else will tell you you're wrong. And then, but like for like really getting it. And that's the same thing here. It's like really getting it that this
and
is.
if you just leave, then you're not getting it yet. You've just left and you're going to end up going back.
Yeah. And then doing all this later anyway. Yeah. I have been following you on Instagram for a while and I remember seeing a post about sexual harassment in a marriage and you laid out a few different like parts. I think there might have been 10 slides.
I remember.
Yeah. Do you know what those are? I think it would be really good for us to name.
I'm looking at my Instagram right now.
Yeah.
See if I can find that because you're right. Oh, do you? Okay. I just found it.
Okay.
So we can talk about it. Yeah. Unwanted touching is a big one. But sexual harassment in general, I think we all have done sexual harassment training in the workplace at some point, right?
Yeah.
So in the workplace, this is lewd comments that are uninvited, sexual innuendo, jokes about sex within earshot of someone, even if it's not directed at you, you're not consenting to that sexual joke. So, but then obviously unwanted touching, objectification, verbally commenting on what you're wearing and how nice you look, catcalling, whistling, comments about your clothing and anatomy, anything that's making your partner feel uncomfortable about themselves. That's just not love anyway, right? That's just not caring about people in your life to do that. But within marriage, a lot of men specifically believe that that's a natural right of a husband and it's rude for the wife for her to have a problem with it.
Yeah.
What's worse too is just like, I know with my kids, when they face a bully at school, if you say to a bully, please stop doing that, they're going to explode with laughter. They think it's funny and they're going to keep on doing it worse because they've gotten to you. So that's another element of it, is that these women can't say to their husband, please don't do that. Please don't say that, because that's going to make him laugh at you. It's just a joke. What's the matter with you? And then it makes it even worse.
Yeah. Yeah. And that everything you said, I feel like I hear every single day. It's so common, but I think a lot of people think they just have to put up with it. So
yeah, because I'm
like,
married now. This is what marriage looks like.
oh, this is my husband.
Those messages all the time.
Yeah. I need to accept him for who he is.
Yeah. Well, and I even saw a video. There was a video. This guy turned out to be a total narcissist, but he's out there pushing this message. This was a year ago. He said to men in his TikTok video, if you're not objectifying your wife, you're doing it wrong. When she's coming out of the shower, you need to be catcalling her and telling her how beautiful she looks. And I mean, he was really actively telling men, this is normal marriage. This is a healthy marriage. And his wife even, I think, backed it up and said, oh, yeah, I love it. And so there are women out there too, perpetuating the same message. And I think to some degree, in a safe, healthy relationship where a woman is free to say no, a little bit of ogling or catcalling could be safe. But the moment somebody doesn't want that to happen, it should stop.
Yeah. And I agree with you. There's probably people out there that's kind of like, I'm definitely not that person, but I think that's such so important. It's like the moment you want it to stop is when it should stop. Like that's what respect actually looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like it's so hard to get there. What do you think the big block is? And like, I'm sure there's a lot, but what do you think like one of the big blocks?
That's a lot.
It's a lot. We can, I'm like,
just self-respect for the victims, to have self-respect, to be able to stand up to it, but mostly for society in general, to have understanding of consent and autonomy, just personal autonomy in general, that every person on the planet has a right to themselves and their body and their thoughts. Children, when we say, oh, give me a hug, and they go, oh, I don't want to. And you say, come on, give me a hug. That's coercion. And everyone seems to do it. And it's not a big deal. And what? It's just a hug. Just give grandma a hug. And so this message is that the kid is wrong for not wanting that hug and for rejecting grandma. Mm-hmm. And that message gets sent out to everybody. We grow up with it and we send it on to our kids.
Yeah. When you were saying that, it just sort of reminded me about like how you could be walking down the street. I'm from New York. So many times I've walked down the street and somebody has decided to tell me that like I should put a smile on and be happy.
Yeah.
And I'm like, go fuck yourself. But like, but it happens all the time. But I used to always be so turned off by that. But I've also always been turned off about when somebody was like, just go, just, give me a hug. And I'd be like, no, I don't want to. Like, I'm just not. And I used to think there was something wrong with me. Mm. And it's probably because I was given similar messages as a child, and like now I have a 6-year-old and like I'm terrified of her going out into the world. It's like, it even comes up for her in school now of like, oh, like this person didn't want to hug me, or this person, or like she doesn't like hugs anymore. And like, I can see that if I wasn't conscious of these things, I would be seeing issues with them. But because I'm conscious of them, I'm not. So you're right. I think it's like a completely societal, like, thing that
so the response there should be, that's okay if they don't want to hug. Ask her if she'll go for a high five, offer an alternative. And if they still don't want it, just nod and smile and give greetings in other ways.
Yeah. I always say like, just wave then. That's fine. Yeah. We can just move on with the wave. Yeah. But so one thing, and this is a big topic and it's going to feel like I'm just like jumping over to another thing now, okay. But I want to make sure that we touch on this. So the first time I was ever told about a sexless marriage was a client came to me and said, I'm in a sexless marriage. I mean, we haven't worked together that long, but it did feel like the narcissist was withholding it from that person. And then, but from following you, it was the opposite. And then I started to like read about it a bit more. And it was more like the narcissist claiming it was a sexless marriage. So can you define what a sexless marriage is? Well, I feel like sexless marriage should be in like air quotes.
Well, everybody has a different definition of sexless. And it seems to be however much sex they want to be having. If they're not having that much, then it's sexless. So if they want sex every week, it's sexless if it's once a month. If they want sex every day, then it's sexless if it's once a week. So it's really relative to what that person wants. And so what I say is, the problem is not that you're not having enough sex. The problem is that you think you're not having enough sex. So the real problem is with whoever it is that thinks they're not having enough sex. No matter how much sex is being had, the problem is the thought that you're not having enough. So there are really happy couples out there that get together once a year.
Mhm.
There are really happy couples that never have sex. There are really happy couples that can have it every day. But most of the time, it fluctuates a lot, depending on life circumstances and hormones. But the point is that somebody who loves and cares for their partner isn't complaining about how much sex they're having because they're working on the entire scope of the relationship. So I don't believe that there is such a thing as a sexless marriage that isn't also a loveless marriage.
Yeah.
If you have a sexless marriage, you have a loveless marriage. There is love missing in that marriage if somebody is upset about how much sex they're having. Does that make sense? There
Yeah.
is a disconnect in that relationship. There's
Yeah.
emotional disconnect. There's a million needs not being met. And I don't like to talk about needs in general, just because sex ends up being a part of that conversation. And I don't believe that sex is a need. I think the need is safety and connection, feeling safe and connected to your partner emotionally. That's what leads to feeling safe and connected physically.
Yeah. Okay. So you like to reframe it as the need is safety. It's not like
Mhm.
the intimacy.
Intimacy is part of that.
Yeah.
Safety first in everything.
Yeah.
You can't be intimate with someone. So without feeling safe with someone emotionally, physically, and psychologically, you can't move into intimacy. And intimacy isn't just physical, it's emotional and psychological. So all those things kind of move into the next thing, but you can't just have one. These guys, a lot of these men want to just skip right to the physical because they think that's giving them the emotional through oxytocin or whatever, but it's just not how it works.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people, I mean, this didn't happen in my marriage, but this happened with an ex, was like sex was the only time that like we were connecting. And then I remember I took like a step back when I was like leaving the relationship. But I remember like one of the things I was thinking about, I was like, he knows what I want because we've talked about it. Like what I like, what I enjoy in sex. I've never once had that. He completely knows what that is. And I realized that how much I had changed myself to lean into what he wanted. And I think that happens a lot where like whatever our likes, preferences are can get so sidestepped. And it just created like this, I don't know, like this like black cloud around sex for me for a while. And I've talked to other clients about this. Like when they're like, our sex was great. And I'm like, was it? Was it really though? Like if it's a yes, then that's a yes. And I believe you. But really ask yourself, like, are they having sex for them? Or are they having sex for the relationship?
Yeah. Oh, and I hear from men all the time. This is how I connect. I connect emotionally through sex. Ask them, is your wife connecting with you at the end of sex? Is she telling you just how much she adores you because she's just had sex with you? Or is she slinking off to the bathroom and maybe having a little cry and you don't know anything about that?
Yeah. Yeah.
A lot of them don't care.
Yeah. True. Right. Well, we touched on like the boundary aspect and like the education to like understand where we are. But when somebody wants to try and like heal from this, so I feel like there's probably people that stay in the relationship and then there's people that leave. So say if we're talking about the people that stay right now, they're like, okay, I've understood that this happens. I need to figure something out. I'm going to try and set some of these boundaries with like either with them or myself. But if we say like there's somebody listening to this and they're like, okay, this is my marriage and I don't know how to make it stop. How can they start to make it stop?
I was just thinking of a friend I have on my website. I have a page called Your Story. It's at alwaysmending.com/your-story.
I'll put your link in the
story.
show notes so anybody can click on it.
Yes. She told a story and it's in my playbook, but she and her husband this is the only one I know for sure made it through this healing process together, and they're still together and doing well. But she said that she had to set a boundary of complete celibacy for like a year. They did not have sex. It was off the table. It was not even a question. And she said this was the only way to get him to completely stop, because as long as there was an option of having sex, he was still going to keep trying to get it. And he was going to keep trying to get it past her boundaries. So thankfully, he went along with this, begrudgingly, I'm sure, but they went through a lot of therapy and he started to recognize his behavior and change. And they're doing much better now. She still has some of those old feelings and feels like it's an obligation sometimes. And she's got to go through and process all of that stuff for herself. that has worked, but it takes a man who is willing to change. And a lot of times these men just don't want to hear it. And they definitely don't want to go through any sort of celibacy for any length of time.
Yeah.
That's a real struggle.
So then if we were to say that most people end up leaving, or if the marriage or the relationship ends up dissolving, how can they begin to heal themselves? It sounds like a lot of women would need to revisit their relationship to sex at all,
Absolutely.
like, and to maybe even form a relationship to what they even like,
Yeah,
or what they want from someone.
Yeah. I did a lot of study and a lot of reading, and I was just looking at this book again yesterday. There's one called The New Art of Sexual Ecstasy by Margot Anand. And she works through this. It has a lot to do with Tantra sex and Eastern practices, probably. But what I loved about it was she starts out just talking about our relationship to sex and our relationship to our bodies. She talks a lot of, in the beginning of the book, it talks a lot about yourself and learning to get in touch with yourself, getting in touch with your own emotions, your own spiritual side, your body, and all of it, and taking time to, and some of the exercises I did was just learning to touch my own body. I would touch my face, or I would touch my shoulder and touch the other parts of my body, and eventually get to a sexual touch. But just receiving touch from myself was even scary.
Yeah.
So very slowly moving through those things to where now it's been 2 years and I finally am with a man who's safe and I'm receiving touch from a man again. But it was a long, long time just to get to a place where I could receive any touch from anyone, even a masseuse or someone. So I think it's a very slow process and everybody has to go through it at their own pace, but just learning to accept touch again. It starts with touch, non-sexual touch, because the body has, the nervous system has been attacked and needs to reset.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Even as you were talking about this before, you said you were uncomfortable. I was uncomfortable. And I was thinking about that. Like I was almost like envisioning, like if I was like, touch my like arm, I was like, oh man, I think I'd be really uncomfortable with that. And so it's so interesting. So before we got started this, we were talking about boundaries and like we laughed about it. Like, oh, my ex just needed boundaries. When I left my marriage, I took 2 years off from any, like, I didn't even want to think that men existed. Like, I just, like, I didn't date. I didn't go on dating apps. I didn't probably put like an ounce of eyeliner on. Like, I didn't even want anybody to see me as like a person that was a viable option for like anything. Like, I was a mom and that was it. And it was how, when we go through all this healing, then we look back and we can kind of put together pieces. It's like, I think then though what I was doing, I was just like healing like what I even felt like what safety was for myself, because I didn't feel safe mentally there. And so I totally wouldn't have felt safe physically, but it was just like this feeling of no, but I couldn't have made sense of that at all. And it sounds like this is all like, it all sort of comes together. And I didn't even realize that. It's like a story almost keeps changing. It's like as you learn more and heal more and move on, but it was such a no.
And it's a lot of bits and pieces, puzzle pieces, taking small moments here and there that made you feel a certain way and sitting in that and processing that feeling and being okay with that feeling, figuring out what it was that caused it and working on a way to let it go. And for me, TikTok really helped that because I was able to just sit down and get something out into a video. I'd have 100 comments from other people saying they had experienced it. And that really helped me process that. And then I was taking it to my therapist at the time to kind of work on it some more. So definitely find a good therapist if you can, and one who understands sexual trauma specifically and sexual coercion, because a lot of therapists, unfortunately, don't see this as a problem in marriage.
Yeah.
And that's a whole separate issue.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I had a client reach out to me the other day and she and her partner were having like a lot of issues. Like they're in couples therapy like twice a week and they were sitting on the couch. She has two young children and he just put his hand up her like thigh and she was like, stop, what is going on? What are you doing? And it turned into this, like she felt so shameful. Like I told her, I said, when you go into therapy today, I want you to know that no matter what the therapist says, you have the right to your own body and you don't have to edit what you think and what you feel based on that. Like this was such a visceral, like, no, like please own, like own that. And luckily the therapist did stand by that, but I think she followed up with me after and she was like, but he went in asking like, well, what are expectations in a marriage?
Yeah.
We haven't had like a session or anything since then, but I've been thinking about that question, like, well, what are the expectations? And I was like, well, the expectation is that everyone feels safe
Yeah.
and that this isn't on any list of expectations. Like if respect is on that list, then this is not
And
on.
this is why myself and a number of other women will not get married because of this expectation. If there is a man who has expectations about my body because we're married, I'm not safe to be married.
Yeah. Well, I know you hear what a lot of women think. I from following you, you also hear what a lot of men think, even though I probably don't want to anymore. What do you think is maybe like the number? I'm sure there's more than one number one, but one of the top things that women really get stuck on in terms of like that they can't seem to get over that thought. Like, when you're healing from like a narcissistic relationship, most people can't get over the fact like that person won't change.
Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of it in the beginning is they think that they can just info dump. Like I can just give him all this information about coercion. He'll see the light and he'll change. I have screenshots of texts with my ex where I had this long thing about this is what the problem is in our marriage. We can fix it. And come on, it'll be fun. We can do it.
It will be fun. Yeah. Let's go to couples therapy together.
Yes. And couples therapy. That is a big one. I would say that a lot of couples in abusive marriages don't realize they're in an abusive marriage and they go get couples therapy. So I always say couples therapy is for healthy couples who just have a little problem communicating. It is not for people with serious issues. And any couples therapist who is taking on somebody with a serious issue like this is being irresponsible.
Yeah. Okay. So it sounds like it's actually pretty similar. It's like a woman who's just realizing this might think that by sending information to the other person, they might change, that this might be an easy thing to fix, but it's actually much more deep seated and it's not. Like actually you said it, you said there's of one couple.
Yeah. I know personally of one couple, but I will say I have had a number of men just in the last 6 months or so. I got a comment even this morning from a man who said, ouch, this hurts. I didn't know my wife might be crying in the bathroom after.
Oh, wow.
So it was just a real simple comment, but I hope that he's going to go ask her about this and have a conversation about it. I know there are men out there, and I do want to talk about this because it's important, but I also don't want to make women think that this might be their husband and they can just go tell him about coercion and he'll get better.
Yeah.
But there are men out there who have been conditioned by Christianity or patriarchy, or they have some misogynistic worldviews, but they don't actually want to hurt their wives. They're not actually abusive people. They just are abusing without realizing it. And a lot of those men, when it's pointed out to them the damage it's doing to their wife, they will be shocked and want to change. They don't exactly know how, and they're kind of confused, and it still can go on for a while, especially if his wife doesn't understand this either. So I think those people could get into counseling together and with the topic of coercion over them and having a real good discussion about what that looks like for them and how that's playing out and what they can do to change it. But that takes, again, both people, and specifically the one doing it needs to be owning that. And I have seen that happen. I can't say that their marriages have improved because I'm not a part of that conversation, but I know that they're having the conversation, and that's important. Yeah. So it does happen, but I would say in my experience, just with the thousands of people that I've talked to on my page, it's probably about 10%.
Yeah.
Are in that direction. I would say the other 90 are outright abusive.
Right. Right. You just touched on the Christianity aspect. Mm-hmm. This is something I tend to stay away from because I've always just been very not anti-religion, but I guess organized religion. I just have always been quite separate. So I can understand it like logistically how things are happening, but I don't really understand what sex in a Christian relationship looks like. But I have had people come to me and that has been a part of the conversation. Can you explain what that looks like? It sounds like there's like an extra element added onto it.
There is. And there is actual scripture that people quote in my comments all the time. 1 Corinthians 7, I think it is, where it says, this is Paul, the apostle, says that you should never deny your spouse. Well, it says don't deny each other. So, and the way that it's worded sounds like you have to consent to not having sex. So it's like both parties have to agree that you're not going to have sex. And the only reason not to have sex is to take some time to pray. Like you're going to be devout and pray while you're not having sex. But otherwise, you have to come back together and have sex so Satan doesn't get you. That's kind of the gist of it. But there's also other passages where it will say your body doesn't belong to you, it belongs to your spouse. So that kind of stuff comes up a lot in coercion too. My ex used to say things like, well, my body belongs to you too, as a way of saying that my body belonged to him and he could do what he wanted. And I wasn't allowed to say no. But then the whole concept of denying your spouse that you are wrong to say no to sex in any circumstance because you're a Christian and you're married. But some Christian marriage books will explicitly say, there's one, Debbie Pearl is an author of a terrible book. And she has a quote that says something along the lines of, do not let your husband go seeking outside the marriage. Do not, be his fulfillment sexually so that he is never looking at porn or other women. Because, and this is the idea that was pushed on me. If my husband looks at other women or looks at porn, that is my fault because I wasn't satisfying him sexually.
Wow.
That is really, really deep in the church. So even if I am self-pleasuring, that's taking something away from him because I'm using up my sexual energy for myself and being selfish in that. And so now I'm not interested in sex because I've just used it up for myself, and that's taking sex away from him. So there's a lot of things within Christianity that and a lot of women deeply believe this. It is a complete brainwashing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I can absolutely understand that and see that just based on just other parts of Christianity that I've heard come into my work. It's something I definitely need to learn more about just because I understand there's a lot of narcissism and abuse.
Yeah, Christianity itself is very evangelicalism, I will say.
Yeah.
Let me specify. Evangelical Christianity is very narcissistic in the way that it handles things, in the way they evangelize, in the way they manipulate people to get into the faith, and guilt and shame and making people feel like they're going to go to hell if they don't do it. And just, it works the same way as an abuser. So these women get caught up in Christianity. Their abusive husband is acting the same way. And this is a godly Christian man. This is not an abusive man.
Yeah. I know that you've kind of touched on some of your story a little bit. Can you tell us a little bit about your story or what you're comfortable sharing?
Yeah. So I was married for 20 years. And the sexual coercion for me started on the wedding night, but I didn't understand this at the time. I'd had a long wedding. I had very few family of my own there. It was mostly his, over 100 people that I didn't know. It was very overwhelming to me socially, being an introvert anyway. And at the end of a long, long day, my feet were black because I'd gone barefoot and I just wanted a bath. We had a spa tub in the hotel room and I was looking forward to it all night. And I was so excited to just relax in the tub. And he wanted to get in with me. He thought it was going to be a wild sexual experience in the tub with me. And I just wanted to be alone for a few minutes. And so I gently told him, my new husband, who I loved, that could I please just have a few minutes alone? And he stomped off and said, fine. And he was angry. And so our very first sexual experience as a couple was coerced.
And so you didn't have sex before the marriage. That was your first.
We did.
Oh, you did.
We did. And so I get asked that a lot. Well, you only said no after the wedding,
No, I was just
no,
curious.
I mean, I'm not saying
after all this Christianity talk, that was like just where my brain went.
Well, I was a new Christian when I met him.
Okay.
So I was very sexually experienced and I was very alive sexually is how I would put it. I loved sex and I enjoyed it a lot. And so I was having sex with him before we were married. It was fun. And I didn't personally believe that that was wrong. And if I wasn't interested in any point, we lived separately. So I could just go home. And I didn't know if he was mad. But if he was mad, it didn't matter because we weren't married. So I don't think he really was upset about it until after we were married. And then he felt like he had a right to me because we were married. So from then on, after the wedding night, we were good for a while. I still loved sex and we would have sex. And then I'd be tired from a long day at work and he'd be mad because I was too tired for sex. And then it was a period or I was pregnant and miserable and didn't want to engage in sex. And, 7 or 8 months pregnant. No, I don't want to. Leave me alone.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he was always, or I'm throwing up.
Yeah.
There was no good excuse. And so as the years went on, it just was this habitual, I know I have to do it because I'm married now.
Yeah. Yeah. And then
And it really was no fun anymore.
was there a book or a Instagram post, or was it just talking to TikTok that made you realize that this was so much bigger than just, I don't want to have sex?
Well, I did for a long time. I thought something was wrong with me. But then as we were getting separated, it started with my kids because my kids were feeling the pressure for a hug, and he would touch their shoulder and they'd flinch away. Right. And he'd get mad at me. He said, "You're teaching them that." And I'd go, "No, I swear I didn't." But I realized in getting them into therapy that their therapist was starting to talk about boundaries, and which I had never really, I'd heard it before, but I didn't really understand it. And I thought that was something that you weren't supposed to do when you're married with your family. You know, if your dad wants a hug, you give him a hug. If your husband wants sex, you give him sex. I didn't understand that I had a right not to do those things. I didn't understand my kids had a right not to be touched if they didn't want to. So as I was starting to learn about that, that's when we were splitting, because I said, this is just too much. I can't handle this. And so as I'm talking about the boundaries on TikTok, I also happened to land on a book called The Great Sex Rescue by Sheila Gregoire. And this is specifically written to Christians about Christian sex and obligation as it's tied to sex. So as I was reading that and talking about it on TikTok, somebody in my comments said, "Honey, that's sexual coercion." And something clicked for me. I remembered from my youth kind of what that looked like in dating relationships. So I Googled it, and I was up probably till 2 or 3 in the morning, learning everything I could about sexual coercion. And I said, that's it. That's exactly what's happening in my marriage. And it was a few weeks later, as I started talking about that I ended up putting a hashtag on it and called it marital coercion. Because I was like, it's still sexual coercion, but it's just a little bit different when we're married. Because there is societal obligation when you're married.
Yeah, an expectation. And then there's also like, well, I can't have sex with anybody else. So like you have to. Yeah.
I get that all the time. You're forcing me into celibacy if you don't.
Exactly. God forbid.
I tell them celibacy is the default until you can get someone to have sex with you.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Well, I really, really appreciate your time and you coming on here with me. I think that we covered so much. I know that this is going to help a lot of people feel like they're not alone. And that's why I want to talk to you specifically about this, because like I told you this when we were chatting before, but like I love that you talk back to the people that are just like saying ridiculous things to you, because it's like those are the voices people are hearing, right? Like those are the voices that people hear is like that same shit all the time. And like they need to see someone else, I think, talking back. But
and I get comments from people saying, "Why are you even bothering with them? And you shouldn't respond to them at all." And I go, I'm not responding for them because I know they're not going to change. I'm responding for all the women who are married to someone like him so they can see how I'm responding to that. And maybe they get the guts to do that themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. Or maybe they just keep following and they're like, okay, this is not okay. Yeah. So we talked about some of like how people can find you, but go over how people can find you, and I'll make sure to put your links in the show notes, but just so we know what we're looking at.
All right. On TikTok and Instagram, both, my username is mending.me. And then my website is always mending.com. I also have maritalcoercion.com, which is a part of my website, but it's just one page that talks about marital coercion. And this is sort of a public facing thing that's not about me, that can be shared. And then the playbook is available on the website too. And that is an ebook. It's a PDF. It's easily shareable. And I wanted it to be an ebook as well so that it's sort of discreet and hidden. You can keep it on your phone and your husband will never know about it. But this is just I've taken a compilation of all the comments from all these men over the last 2 years, all the things they say, and put them all into this book. And there's a hashtag too, things coercive men say.
Yeah.
If you were to look that up on TikTok, you can
I love that. Well, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.